Hello, YouTube! My name is Scott, and welcome to another episode of Opinions No One Cares About, a video series I do in my spare time instead of, learning things. Now, I'm sure you all know, as my incredibly devoted followers, that I ended last season with a look at the TV show Supernatural. It was in its final season, which was broken up somewhat by COVID, and I offered my theory as to how the show would end. Now, since then, the finale has aired and been put up on Netflix, and I've been able to finish it. So I thought it was time, well past time, to make this follow-up video so we could all see how right I was. Now, that video was very poorly made, which I take full credit for. I recently rewatched it, and yikes. So I'm not going to use any of the clips from it here, because compared to this video, they're going to look super amateurish. Which is fair, because I was, and still kind of am, super amateur-y. So let me just sum up my theory right here. And of course, I'm not sure if anybody needs to know this, but spoilers? I envisioned the final battle against God taking place at the Winchester's family home in Lawrence, Kansas, because God in this show considers himself to be a writer and would think it would be poetic to end the story where it began. So there's the fight. God on one side, Sam, Dean, Castiel, Jack, and the resurrected archangels on the other. Imagine God going on and monologuing before Sam pulled out the reformed equalizer, and then there being a scuffle for it amongst everybody, whether they be human, angel, Nephilim, archangel, or God, before Sam got a hold of it again, and along with Dean and Kaz, pulled the trigger and wounded God again, as well as themselves. Did I mention the equalizer was reforged since it had been melted by a demoness? I don't think it did. After that, I theorized that Jack would draw upon his own power as well as that of the archangels to drain God of all his powers and turn him mortal. Then there'd be a look ahead to the future where the Winchester brothers would start a hunter's academy of sorts, before finally dying peacefully as old men. And, like any good Supernatural fan would, I theorized that Bobby had to come back somehow. Because, he's Bobby. So, how did I do? First off, did the final confrontation between good and... it's God, so technically also good, but... Did it take place at the Winchester's home in Lawrence, Kansas? Nope. Random lakeside. Guess Chuck wasn't interested in closing the circle or whatever. Was it God versus Sam, Dean, Castiel, Jack, and the Archangels? No. This one was kind of hard to take. See, Kaz ran afoul of the cosmic entity, the being that controls the empty, which is where angels and demons go when they die. The entity made a deal with Kaz, saying that his life would be forfeit when he felt a moment of true happiness. And unfortunately, that happened.
When Jack was dying, I made a deal to save him.
You what?
The price was my life. When I experienced a moment of true happiness, the empty would be summoned and it would take me forever. You're the most caring man on earth. You are the most selfless, loving human being I will ever know. You changed me, Dean.
Why does this sound like a goodbye?
Because it is. I love you.
Don't do this, Kaz.
Yes. Goodbye, Dean.
Way to play to the Destiel shippers, guys. So, did the Archangels show up, both living and dead? Yes and no. There were only two of them that showed. See, there's this whole other plot going on. Being omnipotent, God knows that Death has a library containing books that outline everyone's personal lives, including how they die, and a plan to kill him and take over as the new god. So, Chuck here would really like to know how his personal story ends. And wouldn't you know it, that dovetails nicely with the Winchesters' plan to destroy him. The two plans run concurrently, so there's a little bit of overlap. I'll try to explain them both, and sorry if it gets confusing. Billy, the Reaper who took over as Death after Dean, killed them, tells Jack about a ritual of sorts that he needs to undertake to become powerful enough to defeat God. And it involves consuming some weird things. First are the hearts of the remaining Grigori, a choir of powerful angels who have been hiding on Earth forever and subsisting on human souls. Next is the Occultum, a sacred artifact that's actually the Garden of Eden, shrunken down and hidden away by God after Adam and Eve were exiled from it. When Jack consumes the Occultum, he is, rather unexpectedly, transported in a flash of blinding white light inside the garden, where the serpent, who surprisingly is still there, restores Jack's lost soul. Finally, Jack needs to consume Adam's rib. Yeah, that Adam. Turns out he's still alive and running a New Age shop in Santa Fe. He explains that everything ever created has a divine spark of energy in it, but his rib, which was used by God to create Eve, has enough energy to mix with Jack's soul and Nephilim grace to turn him into a metaphysical supernova, which will make him powerful enough to destroy God. Unfortunately, Death hasn't just been sitting around waiting to be defeated. Since he's omnipotent, he knows about the Winchesters' plan to defeat him, as well as Death's plan. So Chuck makes a few plans of his own. He talks his sister, the Darkness, into joining forces with him to help him stop the Winchesters. Unfortunately, it's all a trick, and he just absorbs her into himself. He leaves the bunker before Jack's newfound power can kill him, which forces Billy to send Jack into the Empty, the only place in the universe that might be able to contain the explosion. His plan to punish the Winchesters for constantly defying him is to take away literally everyone else on Earth, and force them to live there alone. Oh, and just to clarify that scene from earlier, when the entity took Kaz, it also took Billy, because she sent Jack to the Empty to explode. The entity likes the Empty to stay quiet. Along with Jack, who survived the explosion in the Empty, Sam and Dean find the Archangel Michael, still inhabiting the vessel of their half-brother Adam. Then, as though to add insult to injury, Lucifer shows up as well. Chuck brought Lucifer back from the Empty, and Lucifer came to the bunker with a Reaper. Since the rules go that the first Reaper to be killed after Death is killed becomes the next Reaper, well, Lucifer does this. Because God needs a Death on their side who is capable of reading his Death Book. Then comes a battle between Michael and Lucifer, as was actually supposed to be the way the world ended in the first apocalypse. Like any good villain, Lucifer gets caught monologuing, trying to get Jack on his side, which allows Michael to come up behind him with his Archangel Blade and kill him. Cut to the final fight. Sam found a spell that could unleash enough power to kill God, as long as it was performed at a certain time and place. Fortunately, this plan went awry when God showed up, because Michael, being the ever-obedient son that he is, betrayed the Winchesters to him. Unfortunately, despite the fact that Michael betrayed the Winchesters to God, he can't quite forgive his son for ever siding with the Winchesters in the first place. So unfortunately, Michael is the recipient of Chuck's version of, shall we say, tough love? God decides at this point that instead of just leaving the Winchesters to die alone in an empty world, let's have an old-fashioned beatdown instead. In fact, before this, he was about to snap his fingers and snuff them out of existence. What he can't understand is why they keep getting up again. But that question's answered when God turns around and sees Jack. God attempts to use his power on Jack, but to both of their surprises, it doesn't work. And you may notice Chuck seems to be getting a little panicky at this point. Well, here's why. Jack lays his hands on his grandfather's head and drains every bit of godlike power out of him turning him mortal. So a quick explanation here. The pages of God's death book are blank because literally only death can read it. Sam and Dean, when they realized this, they needed to come up with a plan B. They figured that Michael might be a little upset with God for bringing Lucifer back from the empty, and want to do anything to be able to prove himself as the, perfect son, including killing Lucifer. So they fed him false information to bring God to that lakeside to set a trap for him. They also realized that after Jack exploded in the empty, he became a literal power vacuum, sucking up bits of power from everything around him. When Lucifer and Michael fought in the bunker, and when Michael killed Lucifer, Jack absorbed all that supernatural power. And when God smote Michael and knocked the Winchesters around using all of that godlike power, Jack was there to absorb all of it, and eventually become unstoppable, and, siphon the power out of God and render him mortal. Before going off to, do whatever it is new gods do, Jack uses his power to restore the world back to normal. Sam and Dean, back at the bunker, share a quick beer together and propose a toast to everyone they lost along the way. And the last shot is the boys driving off in the Impala. Great ending, wouldn't you say? Wrong. The defeat of God himself only gets us as far as the penultimate episode of the show, if you can believe that. It certainly looked like a series finale, didn't it? I mean, they literally drove off into the sunset. But believe it or not, there's more story to be told, and more things I theorized about that need answers. This last episode should be an easy win for the Winchesters. They're in Ohio, taking on a group of vampires. Unfortunately, everything takes a turn for the worst when the very last vampire grabs Dean and impales him on a spike. There's a long and tearful goodbye between the boys, where Dean admits that when he went to pick up Sam at Stanford back at the pilot, he wasn't even sure that he'd want to come with him. And the rest of this gets pretty emotional, so let me just skip ahead a bit. Sam gives Dean a hunter's funeral and continues with his life. And Dean wakes up in heaven, which he more than deserved by this point. And look, it's Bobby! Second favorite character. If Gabriel had showed up, they'd have pulled off my personal hat trick. Oh well. But I was right about Bobby coming back. I really should have trusted the writers. Anyway, Bobby explains that with Castiel's help, Jack redesigned heaven. Instead of everybody living out their favorite memories for all of eternity, everyone gets to be together. Sam and Dean's parents actually live just down the road from where they're sitting. But for Dean, it's not entirely perfect. Of course, Bobby understands and says that Sam should be along soon anyway, because time runs differently in heaven. So Dean decides that he's going to take a little road trip while he waits for Sam. And since the Impala is there, because this is heaven, he takes a little drive. And at the same time, we see Sam living his life on Earth. He's got a son who, of course, he named Dean, although interestingly, you never see his wife. There she is in the back while Sam and Dean Jr. are playing catch. We see him helping Dean Jr. with his homework, sitting behind the wheel of the Impala as a much older man, remembering the good times that have gone by. And finally, we see Sam at home on his deathbed. Dean Jr. is there, and he's a hunter as well. And they get to spend some time together before Sam finally dies peacefully as an old man. And finally, we're back in heaven, where Dean decided to stop at a bridge for a second and found Sam. The series ends with the Winchester boys back together, the way it should have been. No Hunter's Academy. Only one of them died peacefully, but Carry On My Wayward Son did play. So I think that's everything I theorized about. Let's do the math. The final fight against God did not take place at the Winchester's house, so half point. And not all the archangels were present, but most of them were. That could be like 3/4 of a point. God did not monologue, so that's a negative. There was a fight. I guess that's a positive. But they didn't use the equalizer, so I think that balances out in the negative. Jack did drain God of his powers and make him mortal, but I was wrong about the way he did it. Partial credit. Like I said, there was no Hunter's Academy, which doesn't really surprise me because I kind of get the idea for the whole future thing from Charmed, the original one. Sam did live to be an old man. Dean did not. Bobby was there. And Carry On My Wayward Son did play. So if you give me a second. Final score is useless scribbling because I didn't really keep track. I mean, come on. It's all arbitrary, and why would I really want to be 100% right anyway? That would have taken all the fun out of watching the finale. So now, my final thoughts. Now, I could sum up the whole show in general, but really my final thoughts have all sort of concentrated in one area. Because I really thought no matter what happened at the end of this show, Castiel would be a part of it. Sam, Dean, and Castiel are an iconic trio. Kaz was invaluable to the boys for years. He carved his name in the table at the Men of Letters bunker. You know, even though his death was kind of foreshadowed throughout the season, I mean, Sam and Dean have both died multiple times. It's never really seemed permanent. There have been so many characters, good and bad, who've come back from the dead using so many loopholes that, despite what the entity said, I did not really think Kaz was going to die. Especially right after telling Dean he loved him. And by the way, unless you were in South America and saw their dubbed version, you missed Dean saying it back. So on the whole, I consider this ending to be pretty satisfying. It was a little bit predictable, but not all, which is great. And it was by and large much better than the endings that I complained about in a previous video last season. And you know what? I hear Jensen Ackles, Dean Winchester himself, is working on a prequel. Now who can go wrong with prequels? Oh. Oh no. Jensen? Maybe don't. I mean, it's over, and you ended it well. And you've got the boys now over on Amazon. Just carry on, wayward son. There'll be peace when you are done. Lay your weary head to rest. Don't you cry.
Stop that! You're not going into a song while I'm here.
Seriously, again? Are you just waiting around for me to sing? What is with that guy? Hey, everybody. So, that's the end of the video. Hope you liked it. Hope you'll do all the usual YouTube stuff, you know, like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for sticking with me through these 2 seasons. Honestly, when I started doing this, I wasn't sure I was going to have enough ideas to get me to the end of 1. And now, well, now I've finished 2. And I've got some more ideas waiting in the wings for Season 3. Until then, there will be some other stuff going up on my channel, some tweet reads, some reviews. Who knows, maybe I'll come up with something entirely new to do. I guess you'll just have to hit the little bell icon as well to be notified when I drop a new video. And until next time, whether it's a different kind of video or the start of next season, I have been Scott, and this has been Opinions No One Cares About. Everyone has opinions. This one was mine.